Chapter 7: The Road to Revolution. The revolution was sparked by tightening commercial, military, and cultural bonds between colonies and the mother country ever since the first crude settlements were put in place a century and a half earlier. Two ideas took root in the minds of American colonists. Those were republicanism and those of the political Whigs. Republicanism required the stability of society and authority of government that thus depended on the virtue of citizenry, and therefore was opposed to hierarchical and authoritarian institutions. The radical Whigs warned colonies about corruption. Both the radical Whigs and Republicans predisposed American colonists to be on alert against any threat against their rights. Great distance weakened British rule over the colonies, which caused Britain to enclose the Americans tightly. British authorities embraced mercantilism that made the colonies supply raw materials and therefore also provided the Americans a guaranteed market for exports. The American colonists furnished products like tobacco, sugar, and ship masts. The Navigation Law of 1650 claimed that goods had to land in Britain so that they would get a share of the profits. However, the navigation laws were loosely enforced and fortunes were gathered through smuggling like that of John Hancock. The mercantile system burdened colonists with annoying liabilities that imposed dependency on Great Britain. From the 7 Years' War, Britain was greatly in debt, and King George began to strictly enforce the navigation laws, and he then secured in Parliament the Sugar Act of 1764 to raise tax revenues. After protests, the duties were lowered and agitation died down. But resentment kept burning when the Quartering Act of 1765 was passed and colonists had to provide food and quarters to the British troops. The Stamp Act was also imposed that applied taxes on stamped paper. Englishmen felt that their rights were getting jeopardized. Protests arose and many cried no taxation without representation. King George disregarded these claims, which led to revolutionary consequences.
Due to the resenting attitude of the colonies in response to the Stamp Act, they took many forms of protesting against the British. This included the Stamp Act Congress in 1765, which promoted colonial unity and contributed to the spark that set fire to the Revolution. Protesting groups such as the Sons and Daughters of Liberty imposed the idea of no taxes relating to liberty and property. As a result, England's economic system suffered. Parliament unwillingly repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. In their gratitude, the colonists in New York built a statue of King George III. Britain then passed the Declaratory Act claiming their complete control over the American colonies. Parliament passed the Townshend Act in 1767, which gave the colonists more taxes and angered them further. The Boston Massacre broke out as a reply from the British to the colonists. Innocent people were killed, including Crispus Attucks.
One of Samuel Adams' most important contributions to the colonial cause was the Committee of Correspondence, which spread the spirit of resistance by exchanging letters and thus keeping alive opposition to British policy. Within a short time, every colony had established a central committee through which it could exchange ideas and information with other colonies. But after a short amount of time, the spirit of rebellion was weakened and colonists were now reluctantly paying taxes on tea and other things. Even though legal tea was cheaper than smuggled tea, the colonists did not like to pay it because they were giving in to the British authority. So in 1773, a radical group called the Sons of Liberty boarded the British East India Company ship full of tea and dumped the tea into the Boston harbor. This event was called the Boston Tea Party. In response, British passed the Intolerable Acts, which were designed to punish the city of Boston. The Quebec Act was passed at the same time, which gave French subjects in Canada territory that extended to the Ohio River and gave them freedom of religion. In response to the Intolerable Acts, American colonists created the Continental Congress in 1774. The most significant action of the Congress was to create the Association. The Association called for a complete boycott of British goods, non-importation, non-exportation, and non-consumption. British Parliament rejected the Congress and sent troops from Boston to Lexington and Concord, where they seized stores of colonial gunpowder and captured Samuel Adams and John Hancock.
Going into the war, Britain had a major advantage in numbers. The British population outnumbered the American population by 3 to 1. They also had 50,000 professional soldiers, combined with 30,000 German Hessians and another 50,000 loyalists, as well as Indians and African slaves that they promised freedom to if they served. However, the British were facing some problems. They had unpredictable Ireland, which they were pressing and could begin fighting back at any moment, as well as a bitter enemy looking for revenge in the French. Britain also did not have 100% support from its population, as some did not approve of killing of their American cousins. Other British problems include second-rate generals, cruel treatment of soldiers, scarce supplies, and fighting in a very expansive land far away from home. The Americans were not doing well either, as they were being badly organized, had extreme shortages in supplies, and were facing an economic crisis. Luckily, they found brilliant leadership in Washington and Franklin. They got foreign aid from the French, and they also fought a defensive war. American soldiers were untrained and unorganized, but thanks to generals like Baron von Steuben, they were whipped into shape and capable of putting up a fight.